So, hello and welcome to episode 13 of Forensic Fix, a podcast brought to you from MSAB, where we invite guests from the industry to discuss the latest news in DFIR, current issues, and a general chat about all things digital forensics, cybersecurity, and investigations. I'm your host, Adam Furman, tech evangelist here with MSAB. So, I'm delighted to announce that today's guest, we have Holly Grace Williams joining us on episode 13. For those of you unaware of Holly, let me give you a small insight into her impressive career. She has 16 years of experience within the cybersecurity industry, specialising in penetration testing and cybersecurity consultancy. So beyond her technical achievements, Holly is an active contributor to the cybersecurity community. She frequently speaks at conferences and appears on podcasts just like this one, where she shares her knowledge and insights on topics such as technology, cloud computing, and cybersecurity, to just name a few. Somehow, she also finds time to be a volunteer for Mountain Rescue, attached to the Bowland Pennine Mountain Rescue Team. Now, she has held various cybersecurity roles over the years, even serving as a former security officer with the British Army Royal Signal Corps. But she became a business owner back in January 2021, happy 3 years, Holly, founding Akimbo Core, a company offering pen testing, system hardening, and offering cybersecurity training. And now, when I was doing my research for this, I love the way I found that you describe your job, which is, "Hi, my name's Holly and I break into computers." That is the best quote ever.
It's a funny one, that, because very often you have to appreciate, and I'm sure you get this on the forensic side of things as well, where um, very often people ask you what you do for a living, and it depends on who you're talking to as to what answer you would give. So if the person's an IT professional or a cybersecurity professional, I would just say pen tester. But
Yeah.
quite often I'm talking to the general public or even maybe on media, and it's trying to get across uh, what it is that I do for a living without any kind of like negative connotations or maybe assumptions on their part. And there's other terms like ethical hacker that you come across quite often, or even just like generically cybersecurity expert. And I think there's like a lot of confusion around what those terms mean to the general public. And I just think like I break into computers for a living gets the point across in a
Yeah.
way that's like a little bit fun and a little bit more interesting than spending 10 minutes explaining what pen testing is.
Oh, it certainly does. And that's a brilliant quote. And I've given our listeners a small insight into the history of your journey and why you're so passionate about educating people in regards to cybersecurity. Now, for those of you on our listeners on this podcast who are not aware of the work that you've done in this space,
Mhm.
can you give us some more details about your past, your career path, and how you ended up founding your own company and being the MD?
I mean, I definitely can. It just depends on which areas your audience would be interested in. Because I think once you've been in the industry for a long time, kind of the things I was doing 15, 16, 17 years ago become just less interesting to people. But I started my career in the military. I did about 6 years in the military, and I was doing the role at the time was called site security officer, but it's the building, maintenance, and decommissioning of secure communication systems. So what we might now call blue team stuff, right? Building and defending networks. And I did that for a long time. And then I left the military. I did a master's degree. My master's is information security with privacy. And then since then, so since my master's degree, I've just done pen testing. So I've done pen testing for, I don't know, like a decade now, whatever the maths works out to be. Um, and because of that, because of spending so long in pen testing and working pretty much exclusively in pen testing, I have quite a narrow and almost biased view of security. And very often people come at cybersecurity from very different angles to what I do. So how I think about cybersecurity versus how, say, an auditor thinks of security, or someone in governance, risk, and compliance, or even like a software developer, is quite different. But the thing is, of course, hopefully everybody understands. Generally speaking, pen testing is it's a pretty fun job, and I've been very lucky that I've worked with so many different companies and so many different projects that, although I've pen tested for a long time, every day is different, and I'm always working on something interesting or a new implementation of something that's just a little bit different. So yeah, my background really, the thing that people will care about is I just hack computers for a living.
Yeah.
Where the education side of things comes from, it started effectively as an accident, and what it was many years ago, I was preparing to do some CREST exams, and at the time it will have probably been my CREST registered tester, which was a long time ago now. But what I was doing was I'm studying for these exams and writing notes in a literal notebook. And when I passed that exam, I thought, well, I've got all of this learning material. It's going to be useful to somebody. So I'll post it to a blog, and that blog was called Graceful Security, and it was literally just I've made these notes, I may as well release them and let people get them, and they weren't specifically just for the Crest Register Tester example, although that was why I started. It was everything. It was just, and quite often a customer would ask me an interesting question, and I'd write them a long email about, well, this is what I think on this topic, and then I would turn that into an article and be like, well, I was asked this question, and here's what I think about it. And I've effectively kept doing that. And just every time something interesting comes up, I publish an article about it. So it wasn't really like, oh, I was passionate about teaching or passionate about putting this material out there. It was more just like, well, I've got the material, I may as well put it out. And as it turned out, people were interested in that. So I started getting asked to do conference talks. I started getting asked to present at events and things like that. So I've done a whole bunch of that stuff, but most of that is usually come up from people seeing me write something about a topic and then asking me. So a funny example that I think will come up later is I wrote a short article about chaos engineering and how we apply that to Akimbo, and then somebody said, "Oh, this is great. This is fits a niche within our event. Can you do a presentation about chaos engineering?" And I'm not a site reliability engineer, and that is not a focus area of mine. But I wrote this content, and it was interesting to some people. So I've done some talks on that, and really that's all that it is. So yeah, I'm not a certified teacher. I'm not an educator at heart. It's just like I produce this stuff as part of my work, and I release it. And I think there's a lot of people within pen testing who come across the kind of training and sharing to the community in that same way. Another example would be something like, oh, you write a tool because it's interesting or it solves a problem on a particular pen test, and then you release it as open source.
Yeah.
And then you get known as being that person who wrote that tool. It's the same story, but instead of an interesting hacking tool, it's a bunch of blog posts.
Yeah, and generally, if one person is asking you that question, you know there is a lot more people who are thinking that question. So putting it down in the blog post makes sense.
Yeah, and also because with cybersecurity, there's so much nuance and there's so much different areas that can impact these things. I know that you're a fan of the phrase "it depends." It's one of those where like it doesn't apply too much to cybersecurity because very often within pen testing, there is a correct and an incorrect answer. It's like, can I hack the system or not? But sometimes when you're explaining the defensive side of things, I found a vulnerability. How would I recommend you fix that vulnerability? There might be 3 or 4 possible answers to that, and one might be better than the other, and equally one might cost more than another. So it's being able to lay that out to somebody and give them the full argument effectively of just like, these are your options and this is what I recommend, rather than, 2 lines in an email, hitting send, and then, well, that'll do because I'm busy and I haven't got time. It's like so much better to just try and write something out in full, and it becomes reusable and, like you say, useful to other people as well.
Yeah. So what made you find Akimbo Core? What services did you want to offer that you felt were lacking?
Yeah, I think there's a few different reasons why people found companies, and some people will found a company because there is maybe like a creative dispute or something like that. So like they want to put a service together in a certain way, and the company that they're working for doesn't allow them to. Or in some rare instances, it would be that there is no company who delivers that service in that way. And really, that's like the creative side to founding companies. And other people want to found companies, or maybe more accurately, become contractors and things like that, because they want more control over their life. So they perhaps want to be able to pick their schedule very specifically, or maybe they've got some requirement like, all right, I need to be able to pick up the kids at 3 p.m. No company will let me have the schedule that I want. So I found a company and get around the problem in that way. For me, it was a little bit different, and it was a little bit based around how I wanted to present the company to other companies out there, and it kind of links back to that. Sharing educational content and that kind of thing. And the Akimbo website still has all of those articles. I was actually migrating some articles over today and seeing that, pulling things that I wrote in 2016 into the 2024 version of the website, because a lot of those are still interesting articles, and how cybersecurity has changed over time is still interesting. So for me, it was more about like how I want to present this information to the company, and specifically on the server side of things. One of the things that we do, of course, penetration testing is a huge part of the business. It's the vast majority of the work that we do, if I'm honest. And I wanted to be able to have a very close relationship with an organization where we can share information during the pen test. One of the things that frustrated me working with other pen testing companies for a very long time is that effectively the pen tester comes in, does an assessment. You don't hear anything from them during the assessment, and then they say, right, I'm leaving now to go write the report. They write the report, and by the time it's gone through QA and proofreading and all of that, several days have passed in some instances, maybe 10 days have passed between the end of the engagement and you're getting that report. And then suddenly it's dropped on your desk and it says, here's all your problems, right? See you next year. And I hated that. So we founded Akimbo around a web platform where we can share information with the customers as we're working through those things, not only about vulnerabilities that we're finding, but also when the customer is consuming that information and saying, right, this is how we think we're going to fix this vulnerability, or this is how we're going to approach it. This is our short-term fix and our long-term plan. We can have those discussions. So to give people an idea of like how that works for those companies, it's a bit more like a ticket management system.
Yeah.
We create a vulnerability that is a ticket, and then we discuss that ticket, and then a plan is put in place and an action plan. And I absolutely love working that way. Some companies do that kind of thing, but they reserve it for the very advanced kind of tests. And it's like, oh, well, purple teaming, we have this very collaborative environment between the blue team and the red team. So the attackers and the defenders are working together and collaborating. But off the shelf pen tests, simple engagements, web application testing, stuff like that, they don't have any of that. So it's very frustrating to me, but that's one of the reasons that I founded Akimbo, was to be able to kind of create that engagement with customers and hopefully deliver a little bit more value by giving them more information during the engagement about what's happening. And also, of course, just having a secure way of communicating with them. So if we find something very bad on a test, an example of that, although very rare, would be during a pen test, we find evidence that a system has been previously compromised. Of course, we need to stop all testing at that point and notify that customer that, like, hey, are you aware that it looks like the system is compromised? And having a real quick, secure way of being able to share that information with them of, this is why we think the system's breached. This is what we recommend you do next in terms of initiating your incident response plan, and being able to guide them through that and guide them through effectively away from our services, because we hack as a service,
Yeah.
we're not incident responders. But being able to do that efficiently is such a benefit. So yeah, there's huge amounts, but it's all to do with communication with a company, and certainly a lot less of, oh, this looks bad, right? Well, very sorry, but it's over to you. We're out of here now. So yeah, trying to solve that problem.
Yeah, it sounds really good. And I think you're right with the communication. I think we all as people like being informed and kept informed. Take, for example, a delivery company. I would always prefer to have DPD deliver because I know I'm in constant communication with
Yeah.
them and I know when it's going to arrive. So it's putting a different spin on it. It's exactly what you're trying to offer with pen testing.
Yes, that's exactly it. And very often people are aware of these benefits. Like I said, purple teamings have pretty much established service now. But like I say, most companies reserve that for advanced tests, but we do it for them all. I love that courier analogy, actually, because yesterday I received an email that said a product had been dispatched, and then I immediately received a second email to say it had been delivered to reception. And that was my courier experience. It was just like, I
Yeah.
heard nothing until it was delivered. And yeah, that's exactly it. We're trying to solve that problem and give you notifications throughout, even if it's just like the test is progressing well. We're finding some vulnerabilities. Here's what we found so far. Here's what we're looking at next, and just keeping customers informed. And very often it's a lot more interesting than that, as you can imagine. For
Yeah.
example, a couple of weeks ago, I was doing a social engineering engagement with a customer and trying to trick members of staff into giving away passwords and disclosing information and things like that. And they were effectively getting like a running commentary of who we'd spoken to, what we'd managed to get out of different staff members. And in that particular instance, thanks to a little bit of good luck and a little bit of skill on our part, we tricked one of their senior developers into disclosing a password. And that was, of course, a huge win for us. And then
Yeah.
we could see their reaction of their internal security team as we're delivering this information live. And they're going absolutely wild, of course, because this is not a good thing that should be possible. But it's so much more entertaining, and there's so much more value for that company there in that engagement, rather than just wait 3 weeks and get a report that says Dave told us his password because he's an idiot.
And it's really good that you use the example of social engineering, because people are always going to be the biggest sort of security risk in any environment. And even back when I was a police officer and I used to do undercover work, part of that role was going to other police forces. And I think it would be about a week a year I would spend trying to break into other police stations, just trying to tailgate off people. And then we'd put a report in saying, yeah, I could get into this entrance and this entrance. And it's exactly the same in a digital space, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. We hear very often as well that, oh, like, use as the weakest link and stuff like that. I don't necessarily agree with that idea. There certainly are commonly a weak link, but very often there's some other aspect there that gets overshadowed. So it's one of those things where it's like, if I can trick a member of staff into giving me their password, that shouldn't matter because they shouldn't be able to use that password because you should have multi-factor authentication and
Yeah.
conditional access. And if you do, then that doesn't become a problem because so few companies have those. I almost called them advanced security protections in place, but they're really not. It's
Basic. Yeah.
2024, current year argument. It's multi-factor authentication. Turn the damn thing on. Because they don't have those things, it does make it the case that I trick somebody into giving me my password, and then it's a full breach, and it's all very bad for everybody. So yes, social engineering is great. I love doing it. Everything from physical access to just tricking people over email. But yeah, I'm not necessarily convinced yet over the users of the weakest link because I think
Yeah.
very often from my side of things as a hacker, it's like there's a whole bunch of other stuff that's gone wrong as well for me to be able
Yeah.
to even do that.
Yeah. And you briefly touched on it,
Mhm.
but what is a normal day like for you?
Mm. Yeah, so it's a little bit different for me because, of course, I run the business as well. So there's some aspects that are like we pay tax and we have to submit documents to HMRC and we have an accountant and all of that stuff. So I'll gloss over that because I think people have a good assumption of what running the business side of things are. So the actual day to day of like the pen testing, there's generally two main activities that I'm involved in. The first is scoping engagements for customers. So this is where a customer comes to us and says, we would like a security assessment. And that process doesn't necessarily work how people expect it to. Because pen testing is so well known and because such a huge number of organizations these days do get pen testing, a lot of it is just, hey, we had a pen test last year. We want something similar, but we're going to change supply for whatever reason. And we would like you to quote for that work. And some of it is like that. And it's very simple. They send us over all of the information, we quote them, and we move on. But a lot of it still is. There's a huge number of companies out there who are still going through that journey of maturing enough to for pen testing to be worth it for them. Maybe they're doing vulnerability scanning and vulnerability analysis, but they're not really doing full pen testing, and it's helping them along that journey. Or maybe they've done pen testing for a few years now. They've had 3, 4, 5 pen tests in the past, and they're thinking, we're no longer getting the value from this testing that we were. What's the next step? How do we do something more in depth than what we've previously done and get more value? So there's a lot of customer education there in terms of like, how would we run this engagement? And also trying to achieve those business objectives in terms of like, um, what are the likely vectors of attack and what are you actually testing? And is that representative and that kind of thing? So very often we think of cybersecurity testing as pen testing, which is most of my day to day, where we're given a scope, we go and we hack that, we find the vulnerabilities, we report to the customer, versus red teaming, which is more about what you were describing a second ago, which is things like physical access, social engineering, and technical attacks all wrapped into one more advanced test. And those are true. Those are two big kinds of engagements, and most people know about those. But of course, there's a big gap in the middle, isn't there? You don't
Yeah.
necessarily one day go, right, we've done a pen test, we're good now, next step, red team. It's helping people along that journey as well and say, well, you've done some maybe external pen tests. How do you get to a more advanced step? So a big part of my job is customer education and working through those projects, planning the logistics of how we're going to do it, and coming up with good scenarios and good projects for customers. And then the other side to it is quietly staring at a computer, hoping to find a vulnerability, which is the pen testing side of things, which I can describe to you as 90% boredom, 10% awesome. And if you've never thought about it before, this really is how pen testing is. We're given a scope to test a system. So this could be like an internal company network, or it could be like a website or a new web application, or a new mobile application, of course, these days. And it'd be like, right, try and hack into this thing. And I've got to map that system. I've got to find all of its functionality. I've got to look through the ways in which that functionality might be flexed in a way that the developers didn't expect. So that could be, an e-commerce website. Can I buy a product without paying for it? Can I refund a product in a way that I'm not supposed to be able to, and all of that kind of thing. So like, what are the ways that I possibly could break this application, and then trying to demonstrate them. And of course, that's the whole report writing side of things, is like showing off, look at all of the awful things that I did to your application. But a huge part of that is literally like staring at a computer, trying to find interesting ways of messing with an application. Sometimes that is collaborative, and we'll work in pairs or in small groups, and each take a piece of the scope and try and build on that together. But quite often, especially with smaller projects, it is I am on my own, staring at an application, trying to find vulnerabilities. So yeah, in part pen testing, 90% boredom, 10% awesome. But I still think it's a good job because those days when you do break through and you do find a
Yeah.
good vulnerability, and you have a customer who cares, and not only do you find a good vulnerability, but you can describe that in a way to the customer where they really get it and they really care about fixing it. So yeah, maybe I'm not selling pen testing as a career in the way that I should, but that is the realistic view of my day, I think.
No, but I think most people within cybersecurity enjoy puzzle solving, and
Yeah.
that's the buzz that they get. So it certainly sounds interesting to me.
Can I just add one more thing to that as well? Very often with pen testing, people, when they're talking to people who are new to getting into pen testing, talk about like report writing as being like the worst part of the job, and the hacking bit's the cool bit, but writing it down's awful. And I actually don't really agree with that, because report writing is telling the story of how you were able to do that. And if
Yeah,
you're just listing vulnerabilities and it's like, oh, cross-site scripting here and SQL injection here or whatever, having a good day if you find SQL injection these days, but list of vulnerabilities. I don't think you're delivering value to that customer. What you should be doing is giving a narrative of like, not only the work that you did, so what are the stages that you went through, but like, how could a threat actor, how could a bad person leverage this application in a way that the development team didn't exist? And telling that story, honestly, one of the best parts of the job. Some people call that report writing. It is what it is. It's like the deliverable to the
yeah.
customer.
And within the industry, what would you say are the current biggest issues that are facing organisations in keeping their data and networks secure?
I think one of the difficulties with questions like that is the fact that systems are so broad now. It used to be the case that companies were quite simple, and maybe they had a public facing website and probably a couple of other services, like maybe a public facing email server or something like that. And then they had an on-prem network where all of their servers were and all of their staff was, and most people, vast majority of people, worked from an office. And now companies are way more complicated.
Yeah,
Not only in terms of things like e-commerce, but a lot of companies have mobile apps that maybe you wouldn't expect them to, because it delivers some value to customers. A lot of companies are cloud hosted or multi-cloud, or they've got some stuff on the prem, some stuff in the cloud. You've got half of your workforce are at home, half of your workforce are remote, so they're not even
yeah,
at home, and maybe there's a couple of people still in the office. And it's just like everything is much more complicated now. The actual specific challenges aren't any different. People have worked remotely and have worked from home for many years. It's just that, in my experience, companies in general are more complex now. So
yeah,
yeah, there's a lot more going on, and that means that securing those systems is a lot harder because there's a lot more complexity there, and also there's the ways in which systems interact with each other. So very often, when we're pen testing systems, it's not a single system that causes a problem, but it's the interactions between systems that cause problems, and very often those are the gaps that get forgotten about. A developer writes a web application, and they secure their little bit, but the consume an application programming interface or pull some data from some data store somewhere, and don't think about the security of that at all. And that interconnection between those two things is where the vulnerabilities often lie. So yeah, I would say that the difficulty for companies these days is just like everything's a bit more complicated now.
yeah.
Everything's a little bit more spread out now.
So for those people who are listening, and predominantly that they might sort of be on the forensic path, but they
Mhm.
may now be considering a career in sort of pen testing, what advice would you give them for being new to it or thinking about starting out in pen testing?
The big thing there is that pen testing is not a single job, right? There will be people out there that are actual factually pen testers that have a very, very different job to me. And the you can customize those roles to the bits that you enjoy, in the same way that, like, hey, if you don't like running a business, don't found a company, work for somebody else. So the parts of my day that they might not enjoy, the running a business side of things, like, you don't have to have those. And like I say, there's pen testing as part of an internal team within a corporation. There's pen testing for a pen testing company where you're working as a third party. There's contract pen testing where you're working for lots of different companies on long-term projects. And then there's the kind of stuff that we do running our team. And it's very, very different. Another way that it can differ is, for example, you might be really, really into networks, really, really into server security, and you might not really be bothered about that stuff that I just talked about, web applications and APIs and mobile applications and stuff like that. That's fine. You can just specialize in network security. You can, if you wanted to, just specialize in exploitation development and just look at code. If maybe if you've come over from malware analysis or something, that would be a good gap for you there. So the first thing is realize that pen testing is a huge range of jobs. Find the bits that you like and then focus on those things.
Yeah.
So yeah, if you're looking at leaving the interesting world of forensics and moving over to pen testing, just find the bits of pen testing that are interesting to you and then build up skills in that area. The truth is, most of the time these days, what I'm looking at is web applications and cloud. So I use way more web application skills than I do networking skills, even though prior to this, I was network engineering and Cisco certified and all of that kind of thing. So yeah, just find the bits that you like hacking at and focus skills in that area. And to be honest, a lot of companies out there, they're more interested in your practical skills of finding vulnerabilities and how you're able to demonstrate and discuss those vulnerabilities to a customer than they are specifically about certifications and things like that.
Yeah.
They can help, but if you just love the security side of things and building up those skills, that'll work. You will get a job in this industry. You don't need to worry. You certainly don't have to think, oh damn, I went to university and got a degree in forensics. This is now useless because I've decided I want to be a pen tester. No. It's all interchangeable. It's not a problem.
And we spoke about this before recording,
Yeah.
about that the sort of certified, expecting people to be certified and qualified has hit the forensic industry quite bad because of ISO, but it doesn't necessarily still mean that you're good at your job, where
Yeah.
experience is being left at the wayside.
Yeah, and again, it's one of those things where there are different companies out there, and they'll have different approaches and different customer bases. So I'll come at it from an angle that annoys me quite often. You'll hear people say, and I will say during this conversation, you do not need a degree to become a pen tester, but that doesn't mean it doesn't help having one.
Yeah.
And I just said, like, hey, there's loads of jobs out there that you can get without being certified, and it doesn't mean that having certifications isn't useful. I have a bunch of them now. I just mean that point of like you can find jobs without that stuff. You can work as a pen tester without a degree. You can work as a pen tester without having certifications from major bodies like Microsoft and CompTIA and stuff like that. There's jobs out there for you. There are some areas in the industry where you do have to be certified and you do need to worry about things like clearances, developed vetting, and things like that. But those are going to be the areas that you expect. Working for central government, working for police, things like that. They might have those requirements. But the truth is, where I spend most of my time, so working in financial sector, financial services, e-commerce websites, a lot of that stuff, they don't care. What they care about is like, are you a skilled pen tester and can you deliver a good report? They care about that way more than they do certifications.
Yeah. And you sort of touched on the different avenues of pen testing, and it's really interesting to me because before we went on air, I was thinking it potentially could lead to being a malware investigator.
Yeah.
I didn't realise some of the guys in MSAB who R&D devices to get into them, effectively they're pen testing, really.
Yes. Yeah. It is true. So like the difference between like reverse engineering hardware and hardware hacking is the very, very close skill sets, in the same way that the skills around reverse engineering malware and then understanding exploitation development, very, very similar. There's actually some interesting ones that you might not have expected. For example, the skills used for exploitation development from a pen testing point of view are very similar to the skills used to write cheats for video games.
Yeah.
So like this, you can pick up those skills wherever. Maybe you were a Cisco nerd in secondary school and you did a whole bunch of Cisco certifications and now you're a network engineer or a network pen tester. Or maybe you like cheating at video games and now you write malware for a living. Like the skills are so interrelated because, of course, computers are computers. That's the thing.
Yeah. And there will always be a way to get in normally into computers.
Yeah, there's always going to be a risk somewhere, and the way that you approach a system, like having a diverse background and having a kind of unique look at a system, is only going to help you. If you get a whole bunch of people working on a project and they've all come at it from, one was a network engineer, one was a software developer, one's a governance, risk, and compliance person. Every person looking at that application will have a different view and will have different concerns. So yeah, it doesn't matter where the path that you took to get into pen testing. It's a useful skill. The point that I'm trying to draw there is like my path into pen testing is an unusual one because I'm ex-military and then I went and did a master's degree. That is not the one path in.
Yeah.
It's like you can come straight from secondary school, you can come from a forensics background or a software development background or a network engineering background or what have you, and you'll still find a good spot within pen testing.
Yeah. So, for those people who are listening to this and perhaps own small businesses who have never used pen testing before,
Mhm.
what are the benefits of inviting pen testers in to your company?
Yeah, so there's two main benefits, but the first one and most direct one is our aim is to find vulnerabilities within your system to demonstrate business risk, and then you can address those risks. So if you don't look for those vulnerabilities and your systems are vulnerable, then those can be exploited by cyber criminals and other threat actors and impact your business. And that impact can differ greatly depending on what your business is. So some companies think, why would anyone hack us? We're not very interesting. We make envelopes, or some other boring example of, company that might not think about pen testing. But there's a whole bunch of different ways that we can impact businesses. We can deface websites and cause brand damage. We can disrupt operations and cause, financial losses through downtime of a factory or something like that. We can steal confidential data and intellectual property and those kinds of things. And the truth is that when you sit down with a pen tester, you should be explaining those things. What is it that would worry you? What is the worst thing that I can do to your systems? Explaining that to the pen testers so that they can demonstrate those risks if possible. And we can kind of tailor the approach that we have. So the most direct thing, like I say, is looking for vulnerabilities so that you can address those risks. But secondarily to that, it's having somebody come in who's completely independent of your team, who has a different view of your systems and can maybe find a way that the system can be leveraged or find some potential impact to that system that you hadn't thought of because you've come from this, closed environment. Your team look at your systems every day and you make a huge number of assumptions about how things are set up. And just getting that fresh pair of eyes to come in and
Yeah,
look at your systems in a different way. So very often we'll talk to companies and they'll be like, oh, what is it that you worry about? And they'll say, oh, ransomware. Ransomware is the thing that everybody
yeah,
talks to us about now. And of course, we will look for those risks and we'll try and demonstrate those things. But quite often, there'll be some other second or third risk that just hadn't been considered as a potential by that company. And when we demonstrate it to them, they see it immediately and they understand, why that could be a concern. So yeah, just having a different perspective is very, very useful from a cybersecurity point of view.
yeah. And you're right. It's always a fresh set of eyes, isn't it? Because we briefly touched on report writing and things like that. Now, back when I was in the police, we had a system in place where the report I wrote went through two other people before it went to court, because you become blind to issues. So, like you say, internally, people become blind to potentially where there is flaws. So, I can see the huge benefits there.
Oh yeah, yeah, absolutely. And sometimes it's just a case of getting that second set of eyes on it. Is just, have I explained this vulnerability well? Have I explained the risk in plain English? So sometimes, I'll put together what I think is a real cool, what we call exploit chain or attack chain. So like a really cool, like where can if this then that through this company's network, and somebody else might read it and go, you've not made it clear here how this was achieved. Your steps to recreate aren't clear enough. Or sometimes it might even be that like the impact that I think I'm making to the customer of like that kind of punchline at the end of the report. It's like, no, you've not made that clear enough. You should present it in this different way. Because of course everybody, like I say, is looking at these things with a different background and different biases. So yeah, sometimes that's all that your QA is doing. They're not actually pushing commas around or changing the technical content. They're just saying, hey, maybe you could frame this differently.
Yeah. And talking about things unclear, now I've seen a term mentioned and we briefly discussed at the start, and that was chaos engineering.
Yep.
That's new to me. Could you
Mm.
elaborate on what that entails? Because it sounds really cool.
Yeah, chaos engineering is great. I wrote a couple of articles about it in terms of how we implemented chaos engineering in Akimbo. So the first thing is not a chaos engineering specialist. I'm not a site reliability specialist, and chaos engineering is really from SRE and from site reliability engineering. But how we apply it and where we think it's useful is if you have a complex system, that system can fail in unexpected ways. So an example could be something as simple as a server's disk gets full and that server falls over, it becomes unavailable. And the idea of chaos engineering is trying to um, impart on systems problems so that you can determine how those systems react. The ultimate goal, making those systems somewhat like self-healing. Of course, that's a bit of a buzzword, but it's like engineering those systems in such a way that they can automatically recover from those failings so that there is no impact on production. And it really is, when it's done well, um, a full injection into production systems to test that those systems are working in the way that you think they are. Of course, that's not where you would start. You wouldn't start in production. You'd start in a development environment or something like that, and you start on simple experiments because we want to control what we call a blast radius. So we don't want to do a full injection expecting one thing to happen and suddenly production falls over in its
Yeah.
entirety. That would make people angry. But the idea being that you get to that stage, that when you start injecting faults into systems, the systems recover automatically, quickly, and in a predictable way. And by doing it in production and by doing it in those live environments, you have full confidence in terms of how your environment is configured, how it's going to work, and that recovery stuff will actually occur. I think anyone who's looked at pen testing or security stuff knows the problem very often where the development environment does not look very much like the production environment, and what works in development might not work in production. So an example of where we would use it, we have this web platform that I mentioned earlier where we can securely share information with customers. That web platform does auto scaling. So if nobody's on it, like 6 p.m. every weekday or on a weekend, nobody's looking at cybersecurity stuff, everybody's signed out and enjoying their free time, we don't have that many users online. So all of those servers scale down. We use elasticity and they all, will fall down to one small potato holding the website up. And as users jump on that, that scales up and we get more and more servers. But then you can start thinking about things like, well, what if one of those servers has some kind of failing? The disk is full or it has a hardware error or something like that. How would the system react? And we can inject those faults. So we can go onto a server, log into one of our endpoints, for example, and just shut it down and see what happens. And very often, applying this to cybersecurity, very often, when you ask companies about things like their disaster recovery plans, they say, oh, yes, we do an annual test. We'll do a failover or something like that once a year. And the problem with that is you can't test very many scenarios if you're only doing disaster recovery testing annually. And also you have absolutely no muscle memory if you're doing that annually. We do a chaos experiment. So we test something within our production environment every 2 weeks. There are some companies out there who do several a day, but the idea just generally being that by flexing those systems in that way, understanding how the systems are configured, engineering those systems so that they're more resilient, we get a much, much better understanding of how our systems work. And of course, ideally, a lot better site reliability. And the big thing is, kind of thing that's often underappreciated is, if a system fails, we have metrics around that failure. So if a web server does fail, we know how long the system should take to recover. If a web server falls over, a new web server will be spun up within 1 minute and 42 seconds. So if
Yeah.
we're sitting there and 5 minutes has passed and that new web server's not up, something else has gone wrong. And we can start investigating that something else well in advance of us actually seeing those symptoms. So yeah, there's a lot of words to say. If you are doing things like disaster recovery testing annually, in my opinion, you're doing it wrong and should take a look at things like site reliability engineering and chaos engineering and what they're doing in that space from a reliability point of view, and start learning some of those lessons and applying them to your cybersecurity and disaster recovery.
If I can remember correctly, going back to my incident response sort of days, they used to call it like a war room.
Yeah.
Or yeah, a war room. And generally it was annually. You're right. It was viewed as annually that we would test companies' sort of run books and things like playbooks and all that sort of stuff. And you'd go through scenarios that are never going to happen. It's a bit like when you're on
even if the scenario is good, you're doing one a year.
Yeah.
You're not getting through very many. So yeah, it's the wrong approach. And I get it because companies are busy and stuff. And I get it because nobody wants to test these things in production. And I get it that people worry about that blast radius and worry about unintended consequences. But that's kind of the point. If you're worried about those things, then you don't have strong confidence in those systems and you should work on that.
Yeah. And generally that's the way it is in cybersecurity, that people, they don't want to invest in the time and the money. But unfortunately, if you wait to invest when it's too late,
yeah,
especially with all the regulations now about data protection and, here in the UK, we're sort of linked in with Europe and sort of the regulations around that. But the US is going to have similar, and the repercussions are huge for companies.
Yeah, not only that, but I mean, you can think about it in terms of like regulation and fines and those kinds of things. But you can also just think of it in terms of business agility. And if I can build our systems to the point that we have very strong confidence in how they're going to react in negative circumstances, then that makes me as a business leader be able to make more informed decisions about what we should do when it comes to future projects and things like that. If you're constantly worried that, a great example from pen testing. Very often in pen testing, we'll escalate privileges within a system and we'll steal credentials. We might get some administrative credentials and we might, for example, get some service account credentials. Very, very common on pen tests, SPNs, stuff like that. And in the report, we'll present to the customer, hey, we stole these service account credentials and now we can do all of these bad things in the network. You should fix this. And one of the things you should do is change those credentials. And quite often we'll hear back from the customer, we cannot change those credentials because we don't know what it'll break.
Wow.
That's it. That's the problem. Now, if you're doing those things, if you're playing around with those things, hey, what happens if that account gets locked? Hey, what happens if we change that password? And you build that up in a very planned, thought through way. When I use the term experiment, I don't mean just like turn a server off and see what happens. I'm like planned, choreographed experiments. Then you won't have those problems. You won't have situations where you say we can't fix that vulnerability because we don't know what will break.
No, that's really interesting, Holly, and I'm sure a lot of sort of the listeners for this podcast, if they're in sort of the forensics, they're now going to be seeing sort of some of the highlights from your side of the cybersecurity. But before I let you go, because I appreciate you're a very busy lady, I wanted to ask you a final question.
Yeah, go ahead.
And I wanted to talk about the part of you away from cybersecurity. So not only do you help and assist people with cybersecurity issues, you also rescue people from mountains. So could you tell our listeners about what that work involves for you?
Yep, I volunteer for a mountain rescue team, and it's more than just mountains. So one of the things with mountain rescue is we're all mountain rescue teams are charities, right? So it's all volunteers through and through, and this is a service to assist those be safe in the out of doors. So this is things that you would expect. It's people who have gone out unprepared. They haven't taken a map. They're wearing trainers. They try and climb a mountain, and it goes badly. But very often, it's people who have gone out well prepared and things have just gone against them. That could be simple things. Like we see people doing things like they've gone to walk the dog and they've tripped over the dog and now they've broken an ankle and they are incapable of getting back. So they need assistance. And which service is it that assists them? In many of those cases, it's mountain rescue. So we've done everything from lower leg injuries right up to paragliders coming out of the sky, hitting the deck and having major injuries, mountain bikers biking into trees and stuff like that. But it's a voluntary service. So I've been with the team just shy of 18 months now. So I'm coming to the end of my training, or hopefully coming to the end of my training. All's going well so far. But yeah, it's just a thing that I started doing because I enjoy the out of doors. And very often people don't think about this stuff when they see pen testers and they just think code and hacking and stuff like that. But yeah, when I'm not at my computer, I spend an awful lot of time outside, hiking, up mountains, those kinds of things. And so it was something I wanted to get involved with to kind of give back a little bit. And also in a selfish way, develop a huge number of skills that otherwise wouldn't be able to develop. Of course, if you go out hiking on your own and things like that, you pick up all of those navigation skills and stuff like that. But a lot of what we're dealing with is medical, pre-hospital care, trauma, that stuff. Also, a huge amount of technical rescue capability. So technical rope rescues. Although I personally don't do it, the team, of course, does water rescues and things like that. So yeah, to give something back to the community, to volunteer, but also selfishly, it's like a lot of interesting things that we get to work on.
And a good sort of industry for you to switch off as well, completely different from the world you work in, day out. And we used to, in the police, we used to use services like what you offer for missing people to sort of help us search large-scale areas. So yeah, that's hugely beneficial.
That's a good example, actually. We do, of course, get involved in missing person searches. Although we're a mountain rescue team, we do offer search and rescue services. And yeah, very often missing people, great example of where like somebody's gone out to walk the dog and they've not come back. And it's, it's a very different capability to kind of the trauma and pre-hospital care I mentioned a second ago, but we get involved in that as well. And yeah, it's just something good, something to give back.
So I'm going to switch it back to techie a little bit, because if we go back to when we were younger, this technology wouldn't have been available. So it would have been large-scale numbers out searching for a missing person, for example. And where you live in the UK, you've got a lot of Pennines and a lot of area that's very hard to search. Are the team using drones at all?
Yeah, but in the same way that the team's using search dogs as well, and they've existed for a long time. So yeah, there's a huge amount of technology that we can use. It's worth looking into, actually, if people are interested in terms of like the services that the police have access to and things like that to find missing people by doing things like pinging their mobile phone and when it works and when it doesn't work and stuff like that. So we do have technology at our disposal. We do have capabilities like drones. We do have capabilities like search dogs. But very often a lot of it is actually data driven. So what do we know about the person who's gone missing? What do we know about the circumstances that they've gone missing? And building it on that. So simple examples would be dog walker's gone out and hasn't come back. They've got themselves a bit lost, but we probably know what their route was supposed to be. We probably know where they started from. That's going to be very different than, for example, a person who is elderly and maybe suffering from something like dementia. They're very different circumstances. But when we perform those searches, they're data driven. We have missing persons data about how these cases have gone previously and where those people have gone. And we use that data for that. But yes, there is a huge amount of tech, and we do get drones out, and we do get search helicopters, and we do get the dogs out, and all of that kind of thing. And of course, people these days are carrying things like mobile phones, and although mobile phones absolutely should not be relied upon, they do now have capabilities. For example, the latest iPhone has satellite communications built in, so you can send an emergency message through satellite communications. This is not brand new. Garmin and other services have done this for a long time through things like InReach, but people do have those capabilities now. It's certainly a lot better than getting a second-hand report from somebody who's passed somebody out in the outdoors and said, "Oh, I think I saw them up there, and I think this is the circumstance," to get a message directly from them that says, "I am here, and this is the situation that we have," especially if it's something like a broken bone or something, and they're relatively simple to deal with. So people do have access to a lot more technology to help them these days, from GPS to satellite communications built into your iPhone.
Yeah. And it sounds hugely rewarding, and like I say, it must be a great switch off from which can be a very stressful day job, really, especially if a vulnerability is happening. You've got a client who are panicking. You've got to be the calm one. So being able to go out and offer something like that, hugely rewarding. And yes, selfishly, it's a bit like when people join the police to become a special constable, which is volunteering. They, of course, are gaining huge skills out of that, which helps them in their day-to-day careers. So I tip my hat to you. It's enjoyable, and
Yeah,
I should
one thing on
imagine
that,
good fun.
quite often when people get to the point where they have to call mountain rescue, when we arrive, quite often they apologize about calling us out. And one of the funny things, of course, is like the team absolutely love it. Like
Yeah,
you don't need to apologize for us for having to call us out for some circumstance occurring. Like the team love it. Any excuse to get into the outdoors, any excuse to do a rescue or get involved in a search or something like that. Yeah, absolutely love it.
that's great. And a huge thank you, Holly, for joining us. And I'm sure our listeners will have found your journey and experiences extremely insightful. And like I said, in the show notes, I'll put a post to your company and to your LinkedIn profile so our listeners can connect and see some of the great work you're doing in the industry and see what Akimbo Core are offering. And just a huge thank you for giving up your time, because I know how busy you are. I think I've lost you now, Holly. I can't hear you.
It's the mute button. Thank you for inviting me. It's been great.
No problem at all. And thank you all.